I was 23 when I first saw the list. It was March 1946, and Berlin smelled like wet concrete and ash. The kind of smell that sticks to your coat, your hair, your lungs, until you forget what clean air feels like. Some mornings, when the wind came from the east, you could still smell the smoke from buildings that had stopped burning months ago. I worked for the Allied Control Council, documentation officer. It sounds more important than it was. Mostly, I sorted through files the SS left behind when they ran, shipping manifests, personnel records, payroll documents, lists of things that didn't matter anymore. My office was in what used to be a ministry building. The windows were blown out, replaced with boards and canvas. The heating barely worked. We wore our coats inside, drank cold coffee, and tried not to think about how much longer we'd be there. Every morning, a new stack of papers arrived on my desk. Reports from depots, warehouses, factories, places the Nazis had abandoned in their retreat. Most of it was routine, inventory tallies, equipment transfers, documentation of things that had already been catalogued, shipped, or destroyed. But this list was different. It came from a depot outside Brandenburg. Small place, nothing strategic. The kind of facility you'd drive past and never notice. Just another concrete box in a country full of them. The Soviets had cleared it 2 months earlier, catalogued everything, handed us the paperwork. Standard procedure. They got the East, we got the paperwork. That's how it worked. I was halfway through the document when I saw it. Storage room 4B, empty. That's what it said. Typed cleanly. No corrections, no notes. Just those 3 words. I wouldn't have thought twice about it, except for the lock. The inventory listed a standard bolt lock for every other room. Rooms 1A through 4A, all the same. Simple hardware, the kind you'd use for a supply closet or a records room. But room 4B had something else. A reinforced steel door with a coded cylinder lock, military grade, the kind you'd use for munitions, or classified documents, or something you really didn't want opened by accident. I read the line again, then I pulled the site schematic from the file. The depot was small, single story, 8 rooms total, arranged in 2 parallel corridors. Rooms 1 through 4 on the left, rooms A through D on the right. Room 4B was at the end of the left corridor, farthest from the entrance. No windows, no secondary exits, and according to the inventory, empty. I sat back in my chair, stared at the paper. Why would you lock an empty room? I brought it to my supervisor, Captain Harrow. He was British, 50s, the kind of man who wore his exhaustion like a uniform. 3 years in Germany had carved lines into his face that wouldn't go away. His office was smaller than mine, colder. A desk, 2 chairs, a filing cabinet that didn't close properly. I handed him the inventory. He glanced at the paper, then at me. Empty means empty, Ellis. Then why the reinforced lock? He set the paper down, leaned back. Maybe they ran out of standard locks. Maybe they were paranoid. Maybe it doesn't matter. It's inconsistent with the rest of the site. Everything's inconsistent, Harrow said. Half the records we get are incomplete. The other half are fabricated. You know that. So we just ignore it. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "You want to chase ghosts, do it on your own time." I took the paper back, folded it carefully. "Thank you, sir." He watched me leave without another word. That night, I sat in my quarters with the list spread across the table. The room was cold, drafty. The single bulb overhead flickered every few minutes. I traced the line with my finger, room 4B empty, and tried to imagine what kind of empty needed a steel door. Maybe Harrow was right. Maybe it was nothing. But I couldn't let it go. The next morning, I filled out a transfer request. Brandenburg Depot. Temporary assignment, 2 weeks. I expected Harrow to deny it. Instead, he approved it without a word. I think he knew I'd go anyway. The depot sat at the edge of a birch forest, surrounded by mud and silence. It took me 4 hours to get there from Berlin. The roads were bad, cratered from bombing, lined with the skeletons of burned-out vehicles. Twice, we had to detour around collapsed bridges. The driver was American, a corporal from Michigan, who didn't talk much. He chain-smoked the entire way, one hand on the wheel, the other holding a cigarette out the window. When we finally reached the depot, he pulled to a stop, looked at the building, then at me. "You sure about this?" "I'm sure." He shrugged, lit another cigarette. "I'll wait." The depot wasn't large, just a low concrete structure with narrow windows and a flat roof that sagged in the middle. The walls were stained with rust and water damage. The front entrance was open, the door hanging loose on its hinges. It looked abandoned, but it wasn't. A Soviet officer met me at the gate, Lieutenant Volkov, young, maybe younger than me, with tired eyes and a cigarette that never seemed to go out. He looked at my papers, then at me. "You're the American who wants to see the empty room," he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Come." Inside, the depot was colder than outside. The walls were bare. The floors were stained with oil and dirt. There were rows of wooden crates stacked against the walls, most of them opened, most of them empty. A few Soviet soldiers were scattered throughout the building, sitting on crates, smoking, talking in low voices. They looked at me as I passed, but didn't say anything. Volkov led me down the left corridor. Our footsteps echoed in the empty space. "We've been here since January," he said. "Cleared everything. Shipped most of it east, some to Moscow, some to local depots. What was here? Medical supplies mostly. Bandages, antiseptics, surgical tools, standard field equipment. Nothing unusual. And room 4B?" He stopped walking, turned to face me. "Empty." We continued to the end of the corridor. The door was exactly as the inventory described. Steel, thick, reinforced edges, a coded cylinder lock in the center. The lock was still intact. "We couldn't open it," Volkov said. "Tried for 2 days. No one knew the combination. The records didn't have it. So what did you do?" "We brought in a cutter. Took 6 hours." He gestured to the hinges. They were scorched, melted at the edges. The metal around the lock was blackened, warped from heat. "And?" I asked. He shrugged. "Empty." He pushed the door open. The room was small, maybe 3 meters by 4. The walls were plain concrete, no windows, no shelves, no markings, no furniture. And he was right, it was empty. Completely. I stepped inside slowly, my boots scraping against the concrete floor. The air was stale, but not old. It smelled faintly of oil or metal, something industrial that I couldn't quite place. I ran my hand along the wall. Smooth, cold, undamaged. "Why lock it?" I said, more to myself than to him. Volkov leaned against the doorframe, watching me. Maybe they ran out of time. Maybe they moved whatever was here before we arrived. Maybe there was never anything here at all. Then why the lock? I don't know. I crouched down, examined the floor. Clean. No scratches, no dust patterns, no evidence that anything had ever been stored here. But the lock bothered me. That kind of security doesn't protect nothing. I stood, walked the perimeter slowly, tapped the walls with my knuckles. Listened for hollow spaces, nothing. The walls were solid concrete, no hidden panels, no false sections. Volkov cleared his throat. "You want coffee? We have some in the office. Tastes like dirt, but it's warm." I almost said yes. Then I saw it. A seam, barely visible, running vertically along the back wall about 2 meters high. It was thin, so thin I'd missed it the first time. I moved closer, ran my fingers along it. The concrete was colder there, just slightly. Volkov. He stepped inside, followed my gaze. "What is it?" "This wall," I said. "It's not solid." He moved beside me, ran his fingers along the seam. Then he knocked on it with his knuckles. The sound was hollow. We stood there for a moment, listening to the echo. Then Volkov said quietly, "I'll get tools." It took us 3 days to break through. The wall wasn't concrete. It was a false panel. Steel-reinforced plaster, painted and textured to match the rest of the room. Whoever built it knew what they were doing. The seams were almost invisible. The color was perfect. Even the texture matched. It was designed to disappear. Volkov brought in 2 of his men, a sergeant named Dmitri and a private whose name I never learned. We worked in shifts, chipping away at the edges with hammers and chisels. Slow work, careful work. The plaster was thick, layered. Beneath it was a steel frame, welded to the concrete. We had to cut through it piece by piece. No one talked much while we worked. There was something about the room, the silence, the cold, the way our voices echoed, that made conversation feel wrong. On the third day, just after noon, we finally pulled the panel free. Behind it was another room, smaller than the first, maybe 2 meters deep, 3 meters wide. No door, no light, just a narrow space that smelled like rust and something else I couldn't name. Something chemical. Volkov shone his flashlight inside. At first, I thought it was empty too. Then I saw the shelves, 3 of them, metal, bolted to the back wall. Industrial grade, the kind used in laboratories or storage facilities, and on the shelves, files, dozens of them, stacked neatly in rows, each one bound in black cloth with a string tie, no labels, no markings on the spines, nothing to indicate what they contained. Volkov reached in carefully, pulled one out. Dust came with it, floating in the beam of his flashlight. He set it on the floor, untied the string, opened it slowly. Inside were photographs, black and white, grainy, taken in low light with cheap film. The first one showed a man in a lab coat, standing beside a metal table. On the table was something covered by a tarp. The man wasn't looking at the camera. His face was turned slightly away, as if he'd been caught mid-motion. The second photograph showed the same man, holding a clipboard, his expression focused. Behind him, partially visible, was some kind of equipment. Tubes, valves, something industrial. The third photograph, Volkov closed the file. "We need to take these back," he said quietly. I nodded. We carried them out in wooden crates. 14 files total, none of them labeled, none of them dated, each one containing dozens of photographs, reports, technical drawings. Back in Volkov's office, we spread them across the table. Every file was the same. Photographs, reports typed on thin paper, technical drawings done by hand, all written in German, all unsigned, no dates, no author names, no official stamps. But there was one thing they had in common, a project code, printed at the top of every document. Programm Schatten. Program Shadow. I'd never heard of it, neither had Volkov. He pulled out a German-Russian dictionary, started translating some of the documents. His German was better than mine. I could read it, but slowly. Technical language was harder. The reports were dense, clinical. They described experiments, procedures, chemical processes. Most of it was beyond me, formulas I didn't understand, terminology I'd never seen. But I could understand the tone, cold, precise, detached, like they were describing the weather. That night, I sat alone in the office after Volkov and his men had gone to sleep. I went through the files one by one, page by page. There were schematics for machinery I didn't recognize, diagrams of rooms with strange configurations, sealed chambers, ventilation systems, reinforced walls. There were photographs of men in protective suits, working in rooms with no windows. Their faces were covered. Their bodies were bulky with layers of rubber and canvas, and at the bottom of one file, written in pencil, barely legible, Phase 3 abgeschlossen, Transfer genehmigt, Standort sicher, Phase 3 complete, transfer approved, location secured. Transfer of what and to where? I looked back at the photograph of the man in the lab coat. Who were you? What did you make? The first name appeared in File 7, Dr. Emil Kortner. It was typed at the top of a personnel document, alongside a photograph clipped to the corner. He was in his 40s, thin, with wire-rimmed glasses and a face that looked like it hadn't slept in years. His hair was dark, receding slightly. His expression was blank, not cold, not angry, just absent, like he was looking at something far away. Beneath the photo was a short biography, born in Leipzig, 1902. PhD in organic chemistry from the University of Heidelberg, 1927. Thesis on synthetic compounds and catalytic reactions. Worked for IG Farben from 1928 to 1941. Recruited into SS Research Division in March 1941. Assigned to Programm Schatten in June 1943. Current status unknown. There was no mention of what the program did. No description of his work. no list of accomplishments or failures. Just his name, his face, and 3 years of his life reduced to 3 lines of text. I handed the file to Volkov. "You know him?" He studied the photograph for a moment, then shook his head. "Never heard the name." "Can you find out if he's still alive?" Volkov nodded slowly. "I'll ask around. We have records from the Berlin occupation. If he was arrested or processed, there'll be something. It took him 2 days. When he came back, he didn't sit down. Just stood in the doorway holding a thin folder. "Kortner's dead," he said quietly. "How?" "He died in April 1945, right before the Soviets took Berlin. Found in his apartment in Charlottenburg. Cause? Officially, heart attack. Unofficially?" Volkov opened the folder, pulled out a single sheet of paper, a Soviet intelligence report, typed in Russian. He translated as he read. "He was found by neighbors. The door was locked from the inside. No signs of forced entry, no signs of struggle. The apartment was in order, except for the fireplace. What about it? It was full of ash, papers mostly. His colleague said he'd been burning documents for days. Wouldn't let anyone in, wouldn't answer the door. Just stayed inside, burning papers. Did they recover anything? No. Everything was destroyed. They found a metal waste bin full of ash, the fireplace full of ash. Nothing readable. Suicide?" Volkov closed the folder. "Maybe, or maybe he knew what was coming. Maybe he knew someone would be looking for him. The Soviets? Or someone else?" I looked back at the photograph. Kortner's face stared out at me, expressionless, tired. "What did you do, Emil? What were you so afraid of?" File 9 had a map. It was hand-drawn on drafting paper, faded but still clear enough to read. Someone had used a ruler and compass, drawn it carefully, precisely. It showed a facility, underground, 3 levels connected by stairwells and corridors. Each level was labeled with a letter. A, B, C. Level A was the largest. Storage rooms, offices, laboratories. Each room was numbered. Level B was smaller, more laboratories, a ventilation system, what looked like a decontamination chamber. Level C was the smallest, just 2 rooms. One was labeled Herstellungsraum, production room. The other was unlabeled, marked only with a red circle drawn around it. Beside the circle, someone had written in ink, Lagerraum 4, storage room 4. I felt my stomach drop. Volkov. He was across the office, going through another file. He looked up. "What?" I held up the map. He came over, studied it. "This is the depot." "I think so." We compared it to the site schematic from the original inventory. The dimensions matched, the corridor structure matched, the room layout was identical. The facility on the map was the Brandenburg depot, but there was something wrong. The map showed 3 levels underground. The depot only had 1 level above ground. "Where are the other 2 levels?" I asked. Volkov shook his head slowly. "We cleared the entire building. There was no basement, no stairs, no access points. Maybe they sealed it." "Maybe." I looked back at the map, at the red circle on level C, storage room 4. Not 4B, just 4. The room we'd found, the false wall, the hidden files. It was on the map. But there was something else. Beneath the red circle, someone had written a single word in German. Verriegelt. Not locked, sealed. "Why seal a storage room?" I asked quietly. Volkov didn't answer. We kept searching through the files. File 10 had the answer. It was a chemical report. 20 pages, densely typed, full of formulas and diagrams I couldn't understand. But there was one section I could read. It described a compound, experimental, synthetic, developed over 18 months of testing, designed to remain inert under normal conditions, stable, non-volatile, safe to handle, but highly reactive when exposed to oxygen in concentrations above 60%. The report called it K-17, Kortner's 17th compound. It was a weapon, not explosive, not biological in the traditional sense. Something else. The document described its effects in clinical, detached language, rapid cellular breakdown, neural disruption within minutes, organ failure within hours, no known antidote, no known treatment, mortality rate, 100%. And at the bottom of the page, a handwritten note in German, ungeeignet für Feldnutzung, zu instabil für Transport, Lagerung unter Verschluss erforderlich, keine Vernichtung möglich. Unsuitable for field use. Too unstable for transport. Storage under seal required. Destruction not possible. I read the last line again. Destruction not possible. I looked at Volkov. They made something they couldn't control. He nodded slowly, his face pale. And they couldn't destroy it. So they hid it. Here. I thought back to the day we broke through the wall, the smell, the faint chemical odor, the coldness of the concrete, and then I remembered something else. The floor. I'd thought it was clean, no scratches, no dust, but that wasn't right. It was too clean, like someone had scrubbed it recently. I went back to the depot the next morning, alone. Volkov offered to come, but I told him I just needed to verify something. He didn't push. I think he was relieved not to go back. The drive was quiet. The same corporal from Michigan drove me, smoking the entire way, saying nothing. When we arrived, the depot looked different in the morning light. Smaller somehow, less threatening. The Soviet guards at the gate waved me through without checking my papers. Inside, the building was empty. The crates were gone. The soldiers were gone. Just bare walls and concrete floors. I walked slowly down the left corridor, my footsteps echoing in the silence. When I reached room 4B, I stood in the doorway for a long moment, just looking. The false wall was still pulled away, leaning against the side. The hidden shelves were empty now. We'd taken all the files. But the floor. I stepped inside, crouched down. The concrete was smooth, uniform grey, but near the center of the room there was a patch about a meter wide that was slightly lighter in color. A discoloration. I ran my hand across it. The texture was the same, but the temperature was different, warmer, just barely. I stood, walked around it slowly, examined it from different angles, then I tapped it with my boot. The sound changed, hollow. There was something beneath the floor. I left immediately, drove back, found Volkov. "I need your men again." He looked at me for a moment. Then he said quietly, "What did you find?" "I don't know yet. We broke through the floor that afternoon. All four of us. Me, Volkov, Dmitri, and the private. We brought hammers, chisels, a crowbar. The concrete was thin, maybe 10 centimeters. Beneath it was something else. Metal, a hatch, circular, about a meter in diameter. Steel, rusted at the edges but still sealed. Around the perimeter were 6 bolts, each one as thick as my thumb. We worked for an hour, loosening them one by one. The threads were rusted, seized. We had to use penetrating oil, let it soak, then try again. When the last bolt came free, we all stood back. Volkov looked at me. "You want to open it?" I nodded. It took 4 of us to pry it open. The hatch was heavy, the seal still intact after years underground. When we finally lifted it, the smell hit us immediately. Chemical, sharp, old, not overpowering, just present, like opening a bottle of cleaning solvent. Volkov shone his flashlight down into the space below. It was a vault, cylindrical, maybe 2 meters deep, lined with concrete, and at the bottom, canisters, 6 of them, steel, cylindrical. Each one about half a meter tall, maybe 20 centimeters in diameter. They were arranged in a circle, held in place by a metal frame bolted to the floor. Stenciled on the side of each one, in white paint, was a code, K17, and beneath that, a warning in German, Nicht öffnen, do not open. No one spoke. Volkov climbed down slowly, his boots scraping against the concrete. He examined the canisters carefully, ran his hand along the seals. "They're intact," he said quietly, "but the seals are degraded. Can we move them?" He looked up at me, his face pale in the beam of his flashlight. "We have to." We transported the canisters to a secure facility outside Potsdam. It took 2 days to arrange. The British Army provided the transport, a military truck with a sealed cargo compartment. Volkov and I rode with the driver. No one else knew what we were carrying. The facility was a former German research station converted by the British into a chemical testing site. It was isolated, surrounded by forest, guarded by soldiers who asked no questions. A chemical team took over when we arrived. 3 scientists, all British, led by a man named Dr. Graves. He was in his 50s, grey-haired, with the kind of face that looked permanently worried. He examined the canisters in silence, read through the files we'd brought, made notes in a leather journal. Then he looked at me. "You understand what this is?" "I've read the reports." "Then you know we can't open these here." "Why not?" "Because if something goes wrong, we contaminate the entire facility, possibly the surrounding area, possibly more. So what do?" He closed his journal. "We open one, in a sealed chamber, with full protective equipment, and we pray we're wrong about what's inside." They opened the first canister 3 days later. I wasn't allowed in the lab. Neither was Volkov. We watched through a reinforced observation window, standing in a darkened corridor with 2 British soldiers behind us. The lab was small, sterile, white walls, white floor, a single metal table in the center. Dr. Graves and his team were dressed in full protective suits, heavy rubber, sealed at the wrists and ankles, with self-contained breathing apparatus. They moved slowly, deliberately. No wasted motion. One of them placed the canister on the table. Another set up a series of instruments, sensors, collection vessels, monitoring equipment. Graves operated the opening mechanism remotely, using a set of controls mounted on the wall. The seal broke with a hiss. Inside was a liquid, dark, almost black, thick, viscous. It sat at the bottom of the canister, barely moving. Graves used a mechanical arm to tilt the canister, pour a small amount into a glass vessel. The liquid moved slowly, like oil. It didn't evaporate. It didn't react to the air. It just sat there. They ran tests for 6 hours. Volkov and I waited in the corridor, sitting on the floor, backs against the wall. Neither of us spoke. Finally, Graves emerged. He'd removed the protective suit. His face was pale, drawn. He looked like he'd aged 10 years. "We need to talk," he said quietly. His office was small, cluttered with papers and equipment. He closed the door, sat behind his desk, gestured for me to sit. He didn't speak for a moment, just stared at the wall. Then he said, "It's exactly what the German documents described. Is it stable?" "For now, but the seals on those canisters, they're degrading. Rubber gaskets, metal threads. They weren't designed to last forever. How long do we have?" "Months, maybe weeks. It's impossible to say." "What happens if they rupture?" He didn't answer right away. Then he pulled out a map of Europe, spread it on the desk. "If even one of those canisters ruptures in an uncontrolled environment," he said quietly, "the contamination radius would be significant." "How significant?" He placed his finger on the map, drew an invisible circle. "Square kilometers. Possibly more, depending on wind, water sources, population density." I felt the air leave my lungs. "Why didn't they destroy it?" "Because they couldn't," Graves said. "Burning it would aerosolize the compound, release it into the atmosphere. Burying it risks groundwater contamination, neutralizing it chemically." He shook his head. "We don't know how. The Germans didn't either. That's why they sealed it. So what do?" He leaned back in his chair, rubbed his face. "We bury it deeper. They chose a site in the North Sea. Deep water, no shipping lanes, no fishing zones, no oil platforms, nothing, just empty ocean 300 meters deep. The operation was classified. Only a handful of people knew. Me, Volkov, Graves, the British command staff, maybe a dozen others. The soldiers who loaded the canisters didn't know what they were carrying. The sailors who took us out didn't ask questions. We left from a port in Hamburg on a foggy morning in April. A small ship, no markings, no flags, grey paint, grey sky, grey water. The canisters were loaded into reinforced containers, each one sealed in 3 layers of steel and concrete. Each one weighed over a ton. They were lowered into the cargo hold one by one, secured with chains and bolts. I wasn't supposed to be there, but Volkov pulled strings. Got me clearance. "You found it," he said. "You should see it through." The voyage took 2 days. The sea was calm, endless, nothing but water in every direction. Graves stayed in his cabin most of the time. I saw him once standing at the rail, staring out at the horizon. He looked worse than before, thinner, older. On the second day, just before noon, we reached the coordinates. The captain gave the order to stop. The crew prepared the crane. Volkov and I stood at the rail, watching. The first container was lifted from the hold, swung out over the water. The crane operator worked slowly, carefully, then he released it. It dropped without a sound, hit the water with a splash, and sank. Gone in seconds. 1, then 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Each one disappearing into the dark water, swallowed by the depths. When the last one was gone, the captain gave the order to leave. No ceremony, no words, just the sound of the engine starting and the ship turning back toward land. I stayed at the rail for a long time, watching the water. Volkov came to stand beside me. "Do you think it's safe?" I asked. He lit a cigarette, took a long drag. "Safe enough." "What does that mean?" "It means we did the best we could. It means we buried something we couldn't destroy. It means we hope the ocean keeps it." I wanted to believe him, but I kept thinking about Kortner, the man who'd made this, who'd locked it away, who'd burned his papers and died alone in a locked room. He knew what he'd created, and he knew it wouldn't stay buried forever. When I returned to Berlin, I wrote my report. I described everything: the depot, the false wall, the hidden vault, the canisters, the tests, the burial. I named Kortner, I named Programm Schatten. I included copies of the documents, the photographs, the chemical analyses. I compiled it into a folder, sealed it, and submitted it to Captain Harrow. He called me into his office 2 days later. The folder was on his desk, unopened. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, "This never happened." "Sir, the depot was empty. The room was empty. You found nothing. But the canisters are at the bottom of the North Sea, where no one will ever find them, where they'll corrode and dissolve and become part of the ocean floor. People should know." "Why?" I didn't have an answer. He leaned forward. "Ellis, if this gets out, it becomes a problem. A political problem, a scientific problem, a public problem. Questions will be asked, investigations will be opened, people will panic. They have a right to know." "No," he said quietly. "They don't, because knowing won't help them. It won't make them safer. It won't undo what was done. It'll just make them afraid." He picked up the folder, held it for a moment. Then he handed it back to me. "Burn it." I took it, but I didn't burn it. I kept a copy, hid it in my quarters, in a locked box beneath my bunk. The official report was filed as Brandenburg Depot cleared, no items of significance recovered, storage room 4B empty, Programm Schatten disappeared from the record. Kortner became just another name in a file no one would ever read. And the 6 canisters at the bottom of the North Sea became a secret shared by less than 20 people, most of whom would be dead within 30 years. I left Germany in October 1948. Took a ship back to New York, then a train to Chicago, got a job with the Veterans Administration, pushed papers, processed benefits claims, tried to forget. I met a woman named Sarah, married her in 1950, had 2 children, a boy and a girl. We lived in a small house in Evanston, with a yard and a fence and neighbors who waved when they saw me. Normal life, safe life. I never talked about the depot. Never mentioned Kortner, or the canisters, or the room that wasn't empty. But I thought about it, especially at night. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to Sarah breathe beside me. And I'd think about those containers, resting on the ocean floor, 300 meters down, sealed, buried, forgotten, but not gone. I wonder sometimes if the seals held, if the pressure and the cold and the salt water kept them intact, or if, somewhere beneath the waves, in the absolute darkness, something is slowly leaking, dissolving into the water, spreading. I wonder if fish swim past them, if currents carry traces away, if someday something will wash up on a shore somewhere and someone will find it and they'll wonder where it came from. I'm 73 now. Sarah died 2 years ago. Cancer. My children live in other cities. I see them on holidays. The files I kept are still in my desk, yellowed, fragile. The photographs are faded. The text is harder to read. No one's ever asked about them. No one ever will. But I know. And somewhere, deep in the North Sea, 6 steel canisters know too. The Nazis marked that room as empty. They were lying. And so were we. Because empty doesn't mean nothing was there. It means we chose not to see it. It means we buried the truth along with the weapon. It means we decided that some secrets are safer kept than told. I don't know if we were right, but I know that every choice has a cost. And I know that somewhere, in the dark water, something waits. Maybe forever, maybe not.